Hey guys, welcome to the Anabolic Roundtable. Today, I'm joined by my own brother, marksmellybell, right there. Dr. Shawn Baker, who is the godfather of the carnivore diet, the one that brought it to everybody's attention on Joe Rogan's podcast. We also have the creator of the vertical diet and world champion powerlifter who had broken every raw powerlifting record in the books at the time, Mr. Stan the Rhino Efferding. Today, we will be asking them questions on getting you more jacked and tan and doing it safely. So our first question is, we have a lot of women and really weak men who are afraid to eat red meat. Does it pose any health risk?
Doc, you want to lead? Lead with that one?
So I would say no, it does not pose any health risk, with the caveat that you eat an adequate amount and not overindulge in that. And it's hard to do. It's, meat is, any food you can eat to excess. It's hard to do with red meat. And so, but the beliefs around heart disease, cancer, so on and so forth, are not based on any, real rigorous, controlled, randomized controlled trials in human beings. And so, I am, I've got data on thousands of people doing a fully red meat-based diet, and the health outcomes tend to be very good for the most part.
Yeah, I'd say not only is it not a risk.
Excuse me, you need to buzz in, sir.
Not only is it not a risk, and as Doc mentioned, the research that shows a small risk is epidemiology, and it's highly confounded by the healthy user bias and the IARC organization's predominance of vegan researchers. But the randomized control trials, the polyp prevention trial, showed us that there is no differential effect on red meat consumption as compared to an alternative diet. And we saw the same thing in the Women's Health Initiative. The largest $750 million study showed no increase in cancer. Not only is it not a risk, but it actually improves health outcomes, particularly for women, because women are much more apt to suffer from anemia, which is a low iron. And because of the women's menstrual cycle, and if they're exercising and in a calorie deficit, which they often are when dieting, they can get exposed to the female triad, which is from chronic dieting, can be anemia, can be amenorrhea, cessation of the menstrual period, and osteoporosis. So I think it's really important, and one of the things I've been talking a lot about since we've been discussing this for many, many years, is particularly for women in this fitness industry, the bodybuilding, figure, physique, bikini, wellness, God knows what else, that those women are most at risk, and the red meat is the best alternative. Plus, protein itself, and we've all been recommending high protein diets for many, many years. We've seen, even compared to, say, the Mediterranean diet, which is about an 18% protein, a 30% protein diet has better blood sugar control for type 2 diabetes in particular. And so red meat, as a primary driver, I think, of your protein in your diet, not only gives you, a sufficient amount of protein. I hate to call it high protein because we think it's adequate protein at 30%. You could even go higher. But it gives you more micronutrients. And all protein's good. We like a variety of different proteins, red meat, eggs, salmon for omega-3s. But it's the preferential choice over, say, chicken, because it's higher in B12, it's higher in iron, it's higher in zinc, it's higher in creatine, it's higher in carnitine. So yes, you can eat chicken and turkey and pork, but don't leave the red meat out, which is commonly been the case in these guru diets and these that you get when you start entering into a weight loss program. They tell you to egg whites, tilapia, broccoli, and in egg whites take out the yolk and throw in some peanut butter. All of those things pale in comparison to the micronutrient value of red meat in particular, and whole eggs right behind it.
Yeah.
Ladies, so you heard it here first. Stuff as much meat as far down the back of your throat as you can possibly handle. Everybody will love it. You'll be more popular for it.
Yeah, and I say all of my clients send me pictures of their meals daily, their morning weight, and their hours of sleep. Those are things I want to see on a daily basis. And so I tell the women in particular, I want to see a picture of everything that you put in your mouth that's not attached to your boyfriend.
Yeah, let me add that there was a nice study out of Duke University, Stefan Van Vliet did 2 years ago, and it looked at the composition of red meat, and they compared it to something like the Impossible Burger. And red meat actually has something like 55,000 unique compounds. It's not just protein and a few vitamins. There's 55,000 different compounds. And when they compared the two, the plant-based version only overlapped 10% of the things you get. So what you get in red meat is so unique. And it's also, for those people that are hung up on phytonutrients, a cow has a much more diverse phytonutrient intake, which ends up in its tissue, in its fat, in its muscle that we actually consume as well. And so it's a very, very tremendously good source of human nutrition. And if we want to go back into the historical and anthropologic records, I mean, human beings have been consuming red meat, particularly large grazing red meat animals, from day one. I mean, it's overwhelmingly that evidence. And if you think about, I always like to talk about this, if the three of us were transported back 50,000 years and you gave us spears and said, go hunt things, we wouldn't be chasing birds around. It'd be a waste of our friggin' time. So we killed these big grazing animals, and that's what we evolved to eat as a species. And our anatomy is uniquely and well suited to digest red meat, absorb red meat. We have a highly acidic gut for that very reason. And it's very expensive from an energy standpoint to produce all the hydrochloric acid that we produce, and that was done for a reason, because we were designed to consume and eat meat. That's why we have a gallbladder, and we're designed to have the fat that comes with meat. That's what we're set up to do as human beings. And so when we get away from that, as what we've been doing over the last century, we see the results, and it's really a disaster.
Well, based on your answer, what do you think would be better, and anybody can jump in here with an answer, what do you think would be better to eat? A Beyond Burger, an Impossible Burger, or 15 slices of bologna?
I would go with 15 slices of bologna.
You gotta buzz in.
I would go with the bologna, quite honestly. But I think that other stuff is highly processed garbage that is not going to help anybody.
Because a lot of people will complain about the processed meats, though. Do we find as big of a problem in the processed meats? Are they not as good for us?
So, again, it depends on what it's processed. When you said bologna, I'm assuming it's a high quality bologna. Right? Yeah, I mean, well, it depends. I don't know, each specific bologna is going to be a little bit different, but in general, I mean, if you look at Impossible Burger, it is primarily made out of soy protein, and it is coconut oil. I think it is Impossible Burger. Beyond Meat is pea protein and canola oil, and then the other 25 ingredients that go with that. And that's not, I don't think any of that stuff is particularly stuff we need to eat. So it's not going to provide us anything other than calories, basically, which we eat too many of them probably in many cases.
Right now it's obviously flu season. It's also a lot of people getting sick with this other thing that we're not allowed to talk about. And a lot of people are blaming that on just simply like a vitamin D deficiency. So it seems like the answer would be to just take more vitamin D, right?
I believe it's the actions that set up your vitamin D to be high that are the most important thing. And so just taking a vitamin D supplement, while it may do something, it might be somewhat beneficial. I think it's more beneficial to hone in on your sleep, to hone in on getting some sunlight every day, and just to hone in on trying to have the lifestyle requirements of somebody that lives a healthy life.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's like polishing a turd or putting lipstick on a pig. If you don't take care of the things, you can't just shove vitamin D supplements and make everything go away. There's vitamin D status reflects your overall physiology and your overall health. And if you're not taking care of those things, and we're all proponents of high quality diets, higher protein diets, strength training, getting good sleep, walking, not being sedentary as much as possible, getting some sunlight probably, all those things contribute to that. And that's the same thing we talked about testosterone. I think the same things show up with this low testosterone epidemic. We have an epidemic of males that are, for lack of a better word, they're soft. I mean, we see that, multiplying. You know, and
That is
you know,
not very nice, Dr. Baker.
it isn't very nice. It's a, you know, it's soft in many ways probably, but I mean, we're seeing that. I mean, you know, you're seeing it generationally. You know, my grandfather was, you know, his generation had testosterone that was, you know, 200% greater than what we're seeing now in the newest generations. And I think it's the same thing, really.
Stan, you have anything to add to that? You good?
I guess I gotta hit the buzzer. Like Shawn said, vitamin D is a marker, not necessarily a maker. What we see is vitamin D status is dependent on the health of the host, generally speaking, and you know, it's true of a lot of other. But we'll say that magnesium is an important component for vitamin D absorption, and so that may be something that's difficult to get from food, in which case you may need to supplement magnesium, and that could by itself, along with obviously the increased sleep and exposure to sun, can help increase your vitamin D status.
I've heard you guys all have an answer for this and different answers, but they all kind of seem pretty similar. What do you think is the ultimate health marker that people can actually look at?
Are you going, Mark?
Yeah, I'll go. I think the main thing is just to be jacked, you know, to work as much as you can on trying to fend off body fat and to also work towards having some muscle mass. To me, I think that's the key to a healthy life. And also, obviously, you got your sleep, getting outside, things like that. I'm a big proponent of walking, but in my opinion, you know, we can study the blood and we can look at all these different things and we can check the plaque in your heart and all this stuff, but if you can't get up a flight of stairs, if you have a hard time getting in and out of your car and doing your day-to-day activities and hanging out with your kids and stuff like that, you don't have enough energy for work, falling asleep in your car, these are all things that are probably a sign that something is off in your life, and it is probably something that could be a little bit more detrimental than you might even think.
Yeah, Mark hit it on the head. If you're going to look at hazard risk, if you're going to put things, if you're going to put things in a hierarchy in terms of most important to least important, then you've got to talk about type 2 diabetes first, your blood sugar status, and that's going to be relative to your sleep, obviously, and improves insulin sensitivity, your body weight, body mass. I will say if you want to test something immediately that can kill you now, it's going to be high blood pressure. I think that a lot of, especially large athletes, bodybuilders, powerlifters, et cetera, even people in, you know, heavy people in sports. I deal with a lot of, you know, linemen in football, et cetera, strongmen. Obviously, blood pressure is the first thing that we address. Sleep apnea is a huge component and contributor to that. Obviously, body weight, central adiposity. Blood sugars, probably the primary driver. After that, you're looking at obesity. We call metabolic syndrome, fatty liver, those kinds of things, and we go down the list until we get to, say, even LDL elevation.
Blood pressure is a weird one because it's hard. It's kind of hard to just test it. How do you recommend that people test it? How often do they test it, and what can they do about it?
Well, it does change throughout the day. I usually test it first thing in the morning. You can just test it periodically throughout the day. It's going to be elevated.
Do you
after.
get like a cuff thing, like a digital
Yep.
cuff, or
you can get a cuff, and you want to test it. You know, after a meal, it's going to be elevated. Some people get white coat hypertension if they go to the doctor's office and they aren't relaxed and they get blood pressure tested. But generally speaking, if you test it daily at the same time every day, upon waking, it might be a decent time. You can get some sense of what the average is. And a lot of these things, like Mark said about the blood testing and the blood pressure testing, et cetera, these are really, you know, even getting on a scale, these are really just things that kind of notify you, hey, it's time to take action. And the action is the same. The action is get more sleep, take more walks, lose some body mass, control. You've got a high blood pressure and high blood sugar quick fix kit that kind of goes down the list and talks to you about ways to improve those markers. And they're the same. 10-minute walks after meals, regular exercise, weightlifting, controlling total calories, those kinds of things.
And Dr. Baker, what do you think the ultimate health marker is?
Strength was never a weakness.
Not being dead. No, I mean, no, I think some of these, everything Mark and Stan said is right on the money. But I think, if you look at something simple like a waist to height ratio, if your belly is less than half of your weight, half of your height rather, that's a pretty good rough guide. It's something anybody can do. You don't need any fancy equipment for it. The associations with a big belly, particularly in males, very highly
Just
correlate.
painting a really funny picture in
trying
my
to do
head.
the
I'm just thinking about like somebody
Yeah, we're
being
getting out our
about half
calculator.
your height because of how big your belly is.
Well, I
That's
mean,
hilarious.
there's some people that are perfect tens, or like they're spheres, they're perfect spheres, but I mean, you see that. But I mean, when we look at waist to height ratio, it highly correlates with insulin sensitivity. It's pretty good with visceral fat, and so and those things are generally, the things you do to improve that are the things we just talked about. Not being sedentary, worrying about lean mass, eating adequate protein, doing resistance training, and I think the commonality that all of us have, including you, Chris, is we all train resistance training. That probably, regardless of what diet you're on, vertical, carnivore, vegan, I hate to say that word, but Mediterranean, whatever, as long as you're getting adequate protein and you're training, that's going to be a huge lever. Now, you can argue about what's the best diet and stuff like that, but I mean, ultimately, it's adequate protein, training, and then dealing with the other things, sleep. And the 10-minute walks are great. I mean, I think those are just, and my philosophy is if I'm working, if I can be standing rather than sitting, I'll stand. If I can be walking rather than standing, I'll walk. And I think that's a good philosophy because we've become such a sedentary society, and it's that's also contributing huge.
Mark and I used to have a philosophy. It was just the opposite of that when we were dirty bulking all those years in powerlifting. We said, don't run if you can walk, don't stand if you can sit, and don't stay awake if you can sleep. That was what we did. And then, of course, just shoveling as much food as possible as we could. If the scale went up, our lifts went up, and that was the old days. But now, as we've aged and we've suffered some of the obvious side effects of those, and we've made the change for the better, I think, for longevity.
A lot of people worry about their cholesterol. I'm on a carnivore diet. I went to the doctor and, my LDL cholesterol was like 180. And then I get all these different responses. You should go on a statin, you should take this, you should take that. What do you guys think about cholesterol and how much importance should we be putting on a cholesterol blood test when everything else feels great and I'm operating at a high level?
So I don't think you should ignore cholesterol. I think that's wrong when these people in the low carb community say you can just ignore it, doesn't matter what it is. I think that's a problem for people. I think you have to put things in greater context. You have to realize, as Stan and we talked about earlier, what are the major risk factors for cardiovascular disease? And it seems to be the more recent literature points to glycemic control, diabetes, and so there's things you can look at. And so, you can have trade-offs. If you can take your blood glucose control and move it into a very nice level, and you can improve insulin resistance, and the trade-off is your cholesterol goes up a little bit, the net effect may be that you've actually decreased your cardiovascular risk. But the problem is most Americans and most doctors encounter people that they're obese, they have poor glycemic control, they're pre-diabetic, they're hyperinsulinemic, they have a lot of visceral fat, they have underlying inflammatory issues, they probably have high blood pressure. In that situation, certainly cholesterol is going to be a problem, and you have to address that. And you can do it through diet, you can do it through drugs. I think the better answer is get more information, see what else you can do, and then there's calculators. You can use a MESA calculator, which is a multi-ethnicity study on atherosclerosis, and you can plug in some numbers. You can get a better perception of what your overall risk is, and then you have to decide for yourself. Is it worth it to me to feel like garbage, as some people do, by desperately lowering their cholesterol by eating a very low-fat diet? And say, is that worth my quality of life? Because ultimately, we're all, as crazy as it is, we're all going to die at some point. And am I going to die of heart disease, or am I going to die of cancer, or infectious disease, or some kind of mental health disorders, or a dementia? And I don't know. I mean, what would I rather do? Would I rather go out at a heart attack at 87, or would I rather have cancer, for the last 10 years of my life? So it's one of those things where I don't think you should ignore it. There are some better tests in my mind. I think a standard LDL cholesterol, the standard lipid panel, HDL, LDL, and total cholesterol, is not particularly that sophisticated. So there's advanced tests you can do, advanced lipid panels. I like what's actually going on with the vessels. So you can get a CIMT, which is a carotid intermediate thickness test, or a coronary artery calcium scan, or there's even some more advanced ones. There's a Clearly test, which is angiography, which is pretty interesting. It's AI calculated angiography, and so there's some better tests if you really want to dig into that deeply. But so the bottom line for me is don't ignore it. It's a red flag. It means investigate further and see what else is going on.
Sorry, let me jump in real quick and just say that there are some people, percentage of the population has hypercholesterolemia, and they will need to be more cautious about how much saturated fat they intake, and maybe to a point how much cholesterol they intake. But do understand, and we discussed this earlier, that consuming cholesterol in your diet does not, for the vast majority of people, affect your cholesterol levels in your bloodstream. Your liver is going to manufacture 1,000 milligrams of cholesterol a day. You eat less, it's going to manufacture more. You eat more, it's going to manufacture less. And of course, there's if you start eating more cholesterol, it takes some time for your body to compensate for that. So that's pretty important. And I think that Doc covered everything else in great detail there about looking at the risks. Look at endothelial function. Look at endothelial, things that cause endothelial damage, that your blood vessel damage. Things like high blood pressure, again, is going to make the LDL more likely to damage the blood vessel. Things like high blood sugars, which we already talked about. Even uric acid can have a damaging effect on the blood vessels. And so if you can control some of those things, even working out increases nitric oxide, which obviously vasodilates, which helps with blood pressure, but it also helps with the elasticity of the blood vessels. So there's things you can do consistently that could decrease the impact of LDL's potential to plaque.